Welcome to Frontier Law and Justice, Week 3. This week, we're going to talk about the Justices of the Peace in Week 3. Do need to let you know that we're recording. This is CCJO 3389. The focus of today's lecture, discussion, whatever you want to call it, is the Justice of the Peace. More specifically, we're going to look at the life and times of JudgeRoy Bean, also known sometimes as the hanging judge. Not to be confused with U.S. Circuit Judge Parker from Fort Smith, Arkansas, who was the judge overseeing and he was responsible for the Oklahoma territories. Judge Parker, hi Jacob. Judge Parker was the hanging judge. He'd sentenced 117 people to hang. He actually oversaw or supervised the hanging of like 80 people. But he was a district judge. He was not a justice of the peace. And justice of the peace, or justices of the peace, are the same today as they were back then, back in 1882, when Judge Roy Bean became the law west of the Pecos. He started in a town. Well, let's back up a little bit. How did he get to where he was? He was a swindler and a con man. He and his brother left Kentucky, went down to Mexico to open a saloon and a hotel and a brothel. Well, he got into a fight and an argument over some woman. It's always some woman. And he killed a Mexican soldier. Well, he escaped. He left Mexico and ended up in San Diego, California, where he was working with his other brother. His other brother got into a squabble with an officer from the Mexican army, and guess what? He ended up dead. And this fight was over a woman. So Judge Roy Bean stayed there in San Diego, California, and tried to run his business, run his brother's business, which was another saloon. And eventually he got into an altercation with another officer from the Mexican army and killed that Mexican officer. So in an attempt to run for his life, he came to a small little town along the Rio Grande River in Texas called Binagaroon. Binagaroon was a way station for the Union Pacific Railroad. The Union Pacific Railroad was building a railroad from San Antonio to El Paso. And they felt that the best way to do this was to go through the Davis and Christmas Mountains and follow the Rio Grande. There were no roads down there. The only road that was in Binagaroon was the railroad. Well, Judge Roy Bean goes to Binagaroon. He opens up a tent saloon, which is a tent with a wooden front. And I like one of the videos that you guys were assigned to watch this week. He was a con man. He was a confidence man. He was a swindler. And he got really upset. He really upset some influential people and ranchers. But like all railroad camps and all railroad places, the outlaws and the gamblers and the prostitutes and all of the people building the railroad show up, and they end up there in Vinegaroon, and they're causing a lot of mayhem. And the Union Pacific Railroad said, and it's true, if you've ever been to Highway 90 along the River Road, what it's called, to Vinegaroon or even Langtree, it's a long drive to Fort Stockton, where the closest law enforcement officers were. Okay, all of that area down there, everything in the Big Bend was open range, open territory. People took care of themselves. If people had a feud, they would take care of that feud themselves. That's why just about every town in the West has a boot hill, because you had an issue, you had a problem, and you took it to the street and you used firearms to take care of it, or you went and you beat the snot out of them, or you did something, you took care of it yourself. There was no law, there was no order. And the same was to be said down in Vinegaroon. So the Union Pacific asked for some help. And the Texas Rangers said, well, the best thing to do is not to establish a marshal or a sheriff. Let's establish a justice of the peace, because the justice of the peace can address civil matters and criminal matters, as long as that criminal matter is still just a misdemeanor. Any felonies, you would have to wait. You'd have to bring them to Fort Stockton so that they can stand trial. Well, this is where the myth and the legend and the folklore come into place. For those of you that are in Odessa or near Odessa or out in the Big Bend, if you get the opportunity to go down to the JudgeRoy Bean Center, Visitor Center in Langtree, Texas, I think it's about a 4.5-hour drive from Odessa. Do so. It's an interesting place. There, the railroad came through, and the tracks are still there. I don't know if the railroad still runs that set of tracks. I've never seen a train on it, although I've seen trains in Alpine and Fort Davis, and Langtree is about an hour east of Fort Davis, an hour and a half east of Fort Davis. And Fort Stockton is also, it's about an hour from Fort Stockton. So I guess it's about 3.5 hours to Langtree from Odessa. The Texas Rangers were always being called or asked to go down to Vinegaroon to fix things. And they thought that putting a justice of the peace in the area would be beneficial. So JudgeRoy Bean became, and he was appointed by the Texas Rangers and by the Texas legislature to be the justice of the peace in Vinegaroon. And he would eventually move to Langtree, Texas. He named the town. He opened another bar, this casino, gambling joint, which was illegal in Texas at the time. And we'll get to that story here in a minute. But he named it the Jersey Lily, after Lily Langtree. He had seen Lily Langtree in concert in St. Louis or somewhere. And he had absolutely fallen in love with this British actress, singer. And so he named Langtree after her. He named his saloon after her, the Jersey Lily in Langtree, Texas. And that doubled as his courtroom. There's pictures floating around, and I used to have one in my office. I don't know where it is anymore, but it's of Judge Roy Bean and his four sons standing there on the porch of his saloon holding court. And he's wearing this humongous sombrero. And he would hold court. When he was in Vinegaroon, this murder trial came up, which is really weird because you've already heard me say that justice of the peace do not handle felonies. But as the story goes, this man, and I don't remember his name, I should remember his name because it's important, especially when we get to Langtree. But this man kills a Chinaman who was a railroad worker. He was building the railroad. And he gets brought to Judge Roy Bean's court. And Judge Roy Bean opens up his only law book. And in this law book, he quotes, he says, "I've read this book from back to forth and forth to back. And I've read about homicide, and I've read about murder, and I've read about all of the crimes that can be charged in the state of Texas and in Vinegaroon, Texas. And at no point do I see anywhere in this law that it's illegal to kill a Chinaman." And he set the guy free, and he dismissed all the charges. And this is something that a justice of the peace can do. This is something that the justice of the peace does do. He can set bond, he can set bail, and he can determine whether or not there is probable cause to move the case further up to the district court. So if there's any truth to this legend, I think that's what he did. He used his power as the justice of the peace to dismiss the charges against this man. Well, I'd also mention that he was a swindler, and he had upset some very prominent lawyers, not lawyers, but ranchers. So when the railroad moved down to what would be known as Langtree, Judge Roy Bean comes in and he tries to purchase some land for his courtroom, saloon, pool hall. But the people that owned the land, owned the ranch, except for the railroad thoroughfare, was all owned by this rancher that didn't like Judge Roy Bean. So this rancher refused to give any land to Judge Roy Bean to build his saloon courthouse. So in comes this manager, this supervisor, this union worker for the Union Pacific, who he had dismissed all charges against, and he gave him a parcel of land that was owned by the Union Pacific. So when you show up, and if you ever go to Langtree, you're going to see where the railroad tracks are, and 75 feet from the railroad tracks is Judge Roy Bean's saloon. And then behind that is an outhouse, a privy. And to the left of that is this little one-room cabin that he lived in with his four sons. One of his sons is even legend to have slept on the pool table, and the pool table was his bed. You go into the pool table where the pool table was. I stand 6'3". At that time, I didn't weigh almost 300 pounds, but there wasn't a whole lot of room for a big man like myself to comfortably play pool. And this is where Sam would sleep, was on the pool table. Most of the cases that Judge Roy Bean heard were misdemeanors, or they were to solve civil disputes. He would, his saloon was normally always filled with people. And And what they did was whoever would buy the most beer normally won the case. He, yeah, he'd get people to buy beer and whiskey and drinks. And if you bought a round of house for the jury, you won your case. So the nickname, the hanging judge, and this is, our discussion this week. You're going to talk about the myth and the legend of Judge Roy Bean. I would really like you to focus on this myth, that he's the hanging judge. If you go to Langtree and you talk to the people at Langtree and the historians at Langtree, you're going to learn that he never purposefully hung anybody. I'll let that sink in for a minute. You guys just watched one of the other videos where they gave this poetic quote about the seasons of the Big Bend and summertime, and the sweltering heat of the summertime, and the nice breezes and the rain of the fall, and the snow-capped mountains and the views of the snow and the crisp air in the wintertime, and in the spring brings green and cattle and grasses and all of the things that we need. But that's okay, because you are never going to see any of these things, because you're going to hang by the neck until you're dead, dead, dead. So the myth, the legend, the lore is that he was this hanging judge. The movies that you see, the Lonesome Dove series, The Streets of Laredo. Judge Roy Bean is there, and he's in that movie. And Paul Newman plays Judge Roy Bean. And I don't remember the guy in the 1950s movie called The Westerner, starring Gary Cooper. There's a guy that plays Judge Roy Bean. And that was the best. And if you ever get to see The Westerner, starring Gary Cooper, and the role that was played by, and the role of the character of Judge Roy Bean in that movie, it shows how he was a swindler and a con man, and he was just always angling to make a dollar. If you go to the Paul Newman movie from the 70s called The Life and Times of Judge Roy Bean, this gives and influences the hardcore lawman who carried a rifle and a pistol and administered justice the way that he saw that it was done. And then you go into The Streets of Laredo, and that character, some reason I want to say it was played by Leonardo DiCaprio, but that doesn't seem right to me. But he was cowardly. I remember that movie. He was kind of cowardly. He was afraid of this cartel, this gang, that and he was eventually killed by them, and which was not true. There's nothing in The Streets of Laredo that's actually true as it comes to Judge Roy Bean. Judge Roy Bean died in his bed in 1910 or 1920. He died 6 months or 8 months before he was able to see or to meet Lily Langtree, who showed up into Langtree because she'd heard about the judge, and she'd heard about everything that goes on in his life, and how much she was infatuated with him. There is another legend or a story that she was going to sing in Fort Davis, and he went and waited, and she never showed up. But she did finally show up to Langtree, Texas, 8 months after Judge Roy Bean's death. But back to my question. Let's find out if he is a hanging judge. Let's find out if he ever hanged anybody. The legend, the story that I heard, and there's this hanging tree that's out front of the courthouse. So, there's this hanging tree. And the story that I got, the understanding that I have was, and I can verify this, there is no jail in Langtree, Texas. So if you couldn't pay the fine, the only other way for punishment, if you can't pay the fine, is to serve jail time. So story has it that Judge Roy Bean would chain you to this tree, and you would have to serve out your time, 2 or 3 days chained to this tree. Well, as the story goes, the tree was full. There was no more room to chain anybody to this tree. So this 16-year-old boy gets arrested for horse thievery. He fines him $100. The kid doesn't have $100. So he goes to chain him to the tree. There's no room in the tree. So he chains him by the neck to Mr. Rodriguez's wagon that's been sitting out in front of the saloon for 3 days. Now, what Mr. Rodriguez was doing for 3 days, I have no idea. But he chains him by the neck to this wagon. Mr. Rodriguez comes, gets onto the wagon, and takes off, hanging this 17-year-old kid. Is it true? I don't know. What I do know is true is that Judge Roy Bean was the law west of the Pecos. But if you look at a map, and I keep looking at this, and I'm pulling up my map now on my phone because it's rather interesting. If you go in here onto the map and you search for Langtree, Texas. It's a dry, empty riverbed. That's Eagles Nest Creek. It's the Rio Grande. There's Langtree. Let's look up the Pecos River. And then we will look for directions from Langtree. Langtree is the little dot. The red pointer is the Comstock Pecos River. Langtree is west of the Pecos River. And that's what he was. He called himself the law west of the Pecos. There's a sign on his saloon that says law west of the Pecos. He was the only law along the Rio Grande River from Del Rio to El Paso. Fort Davis is north, Fort Stockton was north. But if you follow the river road, if you follow Highway 90, you follow the Rio Grande, he was the only law. He was the law west of the Pecos River. So our discussion this week, your discussions this week, are to determine the fact from the fiction, the myth from the lore of Judge Roy Bean. We know that justice of the peace can determine whether or not there's probable cause to move to district courts. We know that the justice of the peace can set fines and punishments for misdemeanors. We know that the justice of the peace can do death investigations. We know that the justice of the peace can determine or declare death. There's a lot of things that the justice of the peace can do. And then there's a lot of things that the justice of the peace cannot do. It's your job in the discussion to tell us what he can and cannot do. Tell us how many people he hanged. You know, his quotes or the quotes that are attributed to him suggest that he hung a lot of people. The historians down in Langtree tell us that he didn't hang anyone. But this is Judge Roy Bean. He is Texas folklore. You've heard of Bass Reeves. You've heard of Jack Coffee Hayes. You've heard of Bigfoot Wallace. You've heard of Judge Roy Bean. What we need to determine is what's the truth. That's your job this week. You guys have been doing a great job in the discussions. Remember, there are no tests in this class. There's this research paper and these discussions. So please treat these discussions like a test. Make sure that your original post is in depth. If it's less than a paragraph, less than 100 words, you're not going to get good points. Make sure that you use a list of sources and you cite those sources in your original post. Make sure that you respond to at least 2 classmates and reply to anybody that responds to you. I know that the due dates are on Sunday and a lot of you guys are waiting until Sunday, but that doesn't give your classmates the opportunity to respond to you or to reply to you. So please, put in your original post or submit your original post on Thursday. I prefer no later than Friday. I go through on Fridays and answer all of the posts. Sometimes I'm busy on Sunday and I don't get an opportunity to go back in. I know for the last 2 weeks, I've made a point to go in on Sunday because very few of you are participating before Sunday. And I want to make sure that I ask my questions and I read what you have to say and then I participate in this class. I know there's a lot of professors that put the stuff out there and you're on your own. But I want to be actively involved in this class, which is why I give these lectures every week. And you can get to see me. Today I'm in my RV. It's too bright, too sunny outside, too humid outside. I'm in a small little town called Lincoln, Texas. I'm about an hour and a half, or about an hour between College Station to my east and Austin to my west, which is weird because for some reason I always thought Austin was east of College Station, but according to my map, I'm in between them, and Austin is west of here. There were 3 of you that I gave you zeros on your research discussion forum. 2 of you because those topics were already chosen by somebody else. If you remember the instructions, you were to read what was already posted, and you could not duplicate research papers. One of you was, I didn't like your topic. I don't understand how your topic links to the West. So the 3 of you, please resubmit, give me a new topic in the next couple days, and I will regrade and give you a new grade on that. For the rest of you, I am really excited about reading your papers. It is, you've got some great topics, you've got some great people that you're looking into, and some great ways. On the last note that I want to talk about is do not let me intimidate you. Okay. I am going to challenge what you have to say. I am going to rebuke what you have to say. Do not bend the knee. Do not take a knee and say, oh, okay, whatever you say. If you have the literature to back you up. If you have the information that you can cite and you can quote and you can identify and say, Otis Redding said this in this article, and this is substantiated, and this is a credible source, don't let me dissuade you from the way that you stand. Stand up for yourself. This is a criminal justice career field. This is a criminal justice world. You are going to become criminal justice practitioners. You cannot let somebody intimidate you into going the way that they want you to go. Again, yes, I'm not your average professor here. Most professors that I know and most professors that I had while I was growing up want to create a bunch of little mini-me's, a bunch of little minions that parrot and echo what the professor has to say. I want you to learn how to think for yourself, stand for yourself, and defend what you have to say. I'm going to challenge what you have to say. You need to defend it, not with rhetoric, but with facts from the truth of the case and truth of the matter. Cite your sources, cite your historians, cite the database, cite the research study. Okay. We live in a world of social science. Okay. Criminology is a social science. Criminal justice, okay, let me back up. Criminology is a behavioral science. Criminal justice is a social science. We're scientists. We rely on research. We rely on data. And we rely on you as our future practitioners to be able to stand on that data and to stand for what you believe is right and correct, and the truth. I know somebody in the background says, well, everybody has their own truth. No, there's one truth, and that's the truth. You can't twist it. You can't manipulate it. You can't make it bend. The truth is the truth is the truth. And if you have the data, you have the research, you have the information to back up what you're saying, that is the truth. Okay. I might come up with stuff that says the exact opposite of what you have said. So then the truth is still unknown. And that's what that means. If science cannot determine and if science cannot refute all questions, then the truth hasn't been found. And if you refuse to answer questions, you're not working on science, because that's what science is. Science is about asking questions, about finding answers to those questions. And that's what we're doing here. We are trying to eliminate the myth and find the truth. So I'll see you guys in the forums. I will talk to you later. Hope you have a great day. Stay cool. The Texas summer has arrived.